And good evening. It's 7 p.m. ish. And as I wait for the cadre to arrive, I will say, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. As it was in the beginning, is now, ever shall be, world without amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for our sinners, now and the hour of death. Amen. As it was in the beginning, is now, ever shall be. Let us take the peace of the earth and make it stronger by co-creating with love. And hello there, you two. This is your Sensei Al Bob. And today was an interesting day. I got down to one of my breakfast spots and started to have a nice breakfast, and there was a whole crew of religious guys, maybe 13, 12, 15, whatever. But they took up, a whole bunch of tables and chairs, and they had their Bibles out, and they had their little laptops with all kinds of things, and they were discussing the text, right? And instead of being, this is what it is, I believe in this is a holy word, I do, and then taking the Bible out of context, because the Bible is this book that you really should read from the beginning to the end, and then go back and read it from the beginning to the end. And if you haven't done that 10 times or more before you start picking it apart, and Joshua said in Luke 32, before you start doing stuff like that, that you really get the whole context of what the Bible is. And it's a code. It's not just a book full of stuff that people said, but it's a code. And the people who first put it down aren't the morons who it's named after, Anyway, we lost one. So, I just kind of listened to them as I was doing my live chat, and I made a few comments on little things that would kind of come into my head from those guys. But when it broke up, I said, so guys, that's pretty cool what you guys are doing. This is great. I really like it. Anyway, so this one guy peeled off and started talking to me, and he, I said, so what church you're from? And they come from an Anglican church. I keep saying how Roanoke, Virginia is the microcosm of America. But I mean, an Anglican, that is so different than anything in America. But these guys, and he goes, and it's really, there's only one Anglican guy there. The rest are like Baptist and Methodist and, and Catholics and Jews and pagans. And they all came because whatever religion they were involved in, whatever church they were involved in, was like, it was rubbing them the wrong way. And then they kind of stumbled into this place, and they had their own cadre. These guys were all adepts. They didn't know it. Anyway, so we, the two of the guys who were theologians, and this guy who was talking to me, basically, in about a 5-minute little thing, we had an interesting conversation where none of us got, oh, he's the other. Oh, ooh, he's not talking like us. Oh, he doesn't believe in what we believe. Because all these guys believe in, we're in churches that believe totally different things from each other. And yet they came together to make a cadre. And they stepped forward into being adepts. They didn't know this. Anyway, they said, because when I started talking the Bible to them, they go, wow, you know the Bible. I said, yeah, not only that, we can, I'm about the Word. And they go, what do you mean the Word? I said, well, if you really want to read the Bible, you need to friggin' read it in Hebrew or Sumerian. And there are books that will help you do that. I mean, you don't have to learn Sumerian and Hebrew. I mean, you can, but there are books that actually talk, as you read the Bible, it has almost a translation back into what it was. And they were, really? Yeah, because they all kind of wanted to learn, so that you have to be part of our group. I said, so they said, every Thursday, come. And I said, okay, I like having breakfast here. I'll make sure it's Thursday that I come. Right. So they were, ooh, goody, goody, goody. And I gave them my card and I said, hey, go on to the chat tonight. And so maybe they will show up. I hope they do. I've been giving up my business card that has the address Dreamy Dreamland and my Gmail and my blog. And, a few people from that neck of the woods have actually got a hold of me. So anyway, I then went from there, and I have, a number of things I have to get done. And I needed to get paperwork from the county and the state, blah, 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 right? So I had to go to courthouses. I didn't have to go to court, but I had to go to courthouses. And I walked into this one, I went to the court clerk's office, right? And I go in there, and it's a little past lunchtime. And I go in there, there's only, one person in the whole office. And she's, sitting at the desk, the computer in front of her. And she's doing something. I go, excuse me, I would like you, can you find me this piece of, and she goes, I don't do that. I said, but, this is the court clerks and it, you got this little thing on your, here that says court clerk, Susie Q. And I said, she goes, I am the court clerk. I don't work in the office. And I go, and that's like, huh? I'm like, and then instead of getting upset or getting angry or getting frustrated, I go, hey, put up the hand you write with. Put it up like this. And she does, because 99.9% of everybody, I say, hey, put your, and then I start talking about her, start telling everything about her, right? And she's just like, right? And after about 3 minutes of, and not only do I tell her about her, but I give her insights. You do this all the time. That's why this happens. And if you do this, that won't happen. And if you do this, you won't get that upset. And if you look at it this way, and I said, so how deep do you breathe? And so I get her to breathe the 20% in, and she goes straight into state, right? So 5 minutes, I snap my finger, and she goes, I saw things in that book that I couldn't. Unbelievable. And she goes, I've been going to a shrink for 20 years. And she looks at the clock. When I was in that library, I thought I was there for days. And it's only been 5 minutes. How? I'm not going to forget that shrink. You showed me more. You've done, right? And I go, and she goes, what do you want to know? I said, I would need a copy of this, this, and this. And she goes on the computer, and she goes, well, let's see. Okay, I got it. And she used her own little bailiwick to get me stuff that the person who would have been there doing the job that she was paid to do wouldn't even know how to get what I wanted. But this woman did, because she was the clerk. She probably wrote the program. Anyway, so she got me everything I needed. Not a problem, And it was no big deal. And then, we're talking, and, then the judge, her boss, the head guy, walks in and goes, what are you doing? And she goes, oh, I'm just getting some documents he needs from the records. And he goes, just like she says, I don't do that. He goes, you don't do that. And he looks at me. He goes, who is this guy? And she goes, he's amazing. He's a great man. She just goes on. And he looks at me and goes, hey, who are you? She hates everybody. She would never say that even about me. Who are you? And she goes, oh, read his palm. And I said, put your palm up. And I put it up, and I started saying some just generalistic things. Hey, that's him. I said, wait a minute. Your Honor, if we really want me to go any further and really kind of give you the heads up, we should go some kind of private. I said, yeah, here's my chambers right over here. Let's go. So I go in there, and we talk about 10, 15 minutes. And again, he is like, whoa. And he's, and I'm talking about certain French philosophers, which he is just gaga about. He goes, when I was in college, I wanted to be a theologian. I wanted to, this is what I wanted to study and know. And then, my father got me into law school, and I followed his path, and I, you know, got to this place, and this is where I am now at 64 years old, and I have all this power and prestige, and but really all I wanted to be was in the library reading, talking about things we're talking about right now. He goes, "Have you had lunch yet?" And I go, "No, Your Honor." He says, "Well, let's go to the judge's dining hall." I said, "Not a problem. You're gonna buy me lunch? Not a problem." So I go there, and we walk in, and everyone's got their black robes or their Brooks Brothers suits and their $1,000 Italian shoes, and I'm looking like this, you know. This is how I'm looking, you know. This is how I'm looking. And, we go to his table. People bring, what do you want today, Judge? And, and I get a nice salad and a nice piece of salmon. And he says, "Can you drink wine?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, just one glass." So they get that. And so I'll have an iced tea, no sugar. And we start talking about philosophy, right? And we talk about the idea of the panoptica. You know about panoptica? Panoptica is like a 19th century philosophy, English philosophy. And as England became the empire, they were going, how are we going to control this? And there was an English philosopher who basically came up with this idea of panoptica. And the metaphor is everybody's in this circular house. And as in the theater, the fourth wall is facing a center column where there's an intelligence operative who's watching everyone, taking down notes on everything that everyone's saying. And you did that. How are you going to do that in a society that has no technology? And you do that through finance and commerce, because all of those folks have ledgers, right? And that's where admiralty law came from. So we started talking about admiralty law, which comes from the big guy, Maxwell, Robert Maxwell, whatever Maxwell that guy is. He's the man, and he is really the best. He's written a bunch of books, and he has great YouTubes, and so I started talking about him, and he goes, "Oh, I've read a couple of his books." He is, and so we started talking about all kinds of stuff, and then other judges came by, going, "Who's your friend?" And this is Owl, not Al. He's Owl, Sensei Al Bob. And they go, "What?" He said, "Oh, sit down. This is most, So the guys who do sit down are like him. They're like philosopher, theologian, open-minded people. The other judges who, they kind of sauntered away. And there's about six of us. And we had this amazing conversation. So anytime I probably have to end up in court for, I have my one little driving infraction, one of those guys might be the judge. And he'll be, oh, and be, you know, prone to be a good person. I mean, actually, instead of just doing, this, okay, actually listening and going, okay, you can, whatever. I'm just asking for a fair shake, because I'm their Sensei El Bob. So anyway, all of that happened today. Again, it was like the little pebble. And then, I left the dining hall, and there's, this place is full of cops with guns and security everywhere. And when they see me coming out with the judge, the look on those guys' faces was like, you know, and anyway, so we all shook hands in the lobby of the state Supreme Court or whatever that place was. It's a big court place. It's not they got different levels of court, but this was and all of the security people were like, "Whoa, what just happened?" I mean, they sensed something just happened. They didn't know what it was, but it kind of alchemically changed the whole energy of that courthouse. And then I walked out. Then I don't know what happened after that. But that was my interesting day. You know, I got a, and the guys, the churchy guys bought my breakfast. When I went to pay the guys, oh, they took care of your breakfast. Right. So somebody bought me breakfast and somebody bought me a really nice lunch. I mean, not like super nice, but not like the swimming pool of chocolate mousse, but nice, like the any kind of nice, like the K&W cafeteria. It was like that nice, right? So that was a very interesting kind of thing. So then I came back here, and a bunch of people every day. People leave things on my feed, and the inbox of my channel, and they also leave me stuff on my Gmail, right? And then I go watch it, and then it's on my history. When you go to my channel, and they have history, my videos, right? And then there's a thing called playlist. I don't know if that's on public or anything, but all those things that are my most interest in the playlist, there is, the things I like and must see, right? And most of the things I said, you guys should go take a look at these videos, and you go, hey, we can't see them. My history, I don't know if you can see that, and my playlist. See, push that, see if you can see that. And a number of you say, oh, we want to help you get your whole platform all copacetic. And, I'm lit. I don't have, they keep saying if you were on a computer, and if you had this and if you could do that, well, I need help with that. So a number of you have offered that, and a number of you have offered to come and get me, and a number, it's all good. See, we're moving in the right direction here, right? And all of you have said, oh, what's that? Western Union. Send me some, a gratuity via Western Union to Al, A-L, or Martino in Roanoke, Virginia, and then email me on the Dude Awake 42 on Gmail with the tracking number, and I can go to Western Union. And that actually works very well. A number of you have sent me, and I have to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because it's amazing. Every freaking time I have no money, and I've had to replace 2 of my front tires, right? They were like, again, they want close to $200 a tire. The Firestone guy gave me each one for $62, and somebody sent me that money to do it, so it is what it is. I'm living like a millionaire and not being one, right? So that is the line on that. But what I want to talk tonight, so that we are, the panoptica is happening, with the video surveillance, with facial recognition. Back in 2001, I did I used to work as a demographer for supermarkets and real estate guys, and to look at the next neck of the woods that they could buy really cheap and just put 1,000, nice 2,000 square foot houses in a shopping center, and it was close enough to Philly or DC or New York or whatever, but it was in a neck of the woods that wasn't there. And I was really good at finding those little spots, the next spot. And how I made a little money was, I would pick the spot. And what was really interesting when you go to, and this is why I know about court clerks and stuff like that, to get the demographic information, you got to go to the county clerk. And there are lots or chunks of property that aren't really public. They're like county property or state property, but not, John Q. Public's property where you buy that farm. But these like little lots, right? And cities and counties and states own lots of property in their cities, county, and states. They get it back from back taxes, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so when they sell these things, there are these lines between you could buy 50 acres over here and a thousand acres over there, and there are these lines where the property lines from the different private properties that the state took over don't line up. They don't just go right up against each other, and some of them are like you know 3 feet wide, and 20 miles long, whatever, right? And they sell those on auctions, right? And they do it, with the advent of the internet. They basically do it that they don't have people come and like bid. They basically it's a closed bid. They have a big list of all this stuff, and they say we're going to sell it on this date, and if you put X amount of money in this bank account, and which would cover the cost of holding it until you buy it, and then you put a bid in, and if that bid is smaller than the money you put in, you can use that money to pay for that. Anyway, this is the general process. And as I would travel around the East Coast looking at property for these companies, and I would say, yeah, these guys are going to do this. So I would, but it would take them at least a year or two to like make up their mind, because there'd be 4 or 5 different areas. Anyway, I would buy up those little slivers, right? And I would, let's say you had to put in $500. I put in $500, and I would say, okay, I'll pay $30 for this little sliver, and $40 for this little sliver, and $60 for this, and and I would get half of them, or all of them, or none of them, or two of them, and then I would buy them and get their, deed and certificate that I own that little sliver that's 3 feet wide. But when these guys would then go buy the big chunks of property and they wanted to put their mall there or their neighborhood there, I would own all these little slivers. And until they bought those little slivers from me, they were not building that stuff. And they'd either, after buying that property, they would have to either hold on to that or not do it or sell it to somebody else. And usually I was not greedy. I would give them a price that was negligible to them, nice to me. So that was one of my little things. So I went around the country doing this, and actually my employers kind of knew that I was doing this after the first few times that I did it, and they kind of saw it as like a guarantee. Now, if Al's going to put in his limited resources to buy these little slivers, well, they must be pretty good, right? So I got aware of all of this, right? And a lot of the companies, so we just didn't do that. We did all kinds of things, power lines, highways, all that kind of stuff. And when 9/11 happened, and they went into the Patriot Act and the TSA and all of that, there's one company I worked for, and I worked on doing the same statistical analysis of flows of traffic, right? And that's how we figured out, this road should be widened to this and da-da-da, right? And they put those little hoses over the road to count the cars, right? Once the road would get widened, they would put in traffic lights where there were no, it used to be just a stop sign on that little road. Now it's 6 lanes, so they got to have a traffic light. And so that company did the traffic lights. So because I did all of the groundwork on, the flow of traffic, when they would put in those traffic lights, I would then help the guys who put in the traffic lights. And when I did this in the 98, 99, 2000, they were just starting to put the cameras on the traffic lights, right? And the cameras weren't there to take pictures of you. They could, but they weren't. What they were the eyes of these traffic lights, because now all the traffic lights, instead of being electromechanical, they were computerized, right? And then that way they could be all linked together and sent back to, the central traffic location where they could, change them and, do all kinds of things with them, right? We did that, and we made the algorithms to the data that I had of the flow of the traffic, right? So I got very good with that. And we could, with these algorithms, peg when this problem, we could almost say when an accident was going to happen. And this is like in 99, 2000. So just by the flow of the traffic. So 9/11 happens, and everyone's, oh, and my boss who hired me, because I was not like anybody else who worked in this place, and I was a contract player. I wasn't an employee. I would get gigs because that's how I wanted to work, because that way he could pay me more because I wouldn't, he wouldn't have to tell his other employees how much. I was just a contract boy. This is just a contract. Anyway, I said to this one guy, who was the boss who owned everything, and he was one of the major players in this, and he was just starting to think about TSA because he was reading all of the, they were putting out contracts for surveillance equipment and stuff like that. And we were starting to take that same, TV surveillance, CTV, that we're putting in the traffic lights. And we started, one of our clients was a supermarket. And we started putting that into there. Use those same algorithms to figure out the flow of the consumers and where to put the products in a better place. And also where thievery was happening, right? I mean, then just through kind of a happy accident within the construct of this algorithm that we were putting, that the algorithm, I didn't, but I was the humanistic counselor in these mathematicians making these computer algorithms. And we figured out that we could actually tell by how the body movement was going, because I was really getting into tells, who's going to rob, so the camera could focus on that person and leave grandma alone. Anyway, it turned out so remarkably amazing that my boss said, we should write a proposal to TSA and the federal government about terrorism, that we could figure out who was going to do it before they do it just by this. I mean, look, if we can figure out who's going to steal a thing of peanut butter, we can, at the airports and all that stuff, and they won't need all that other stuff, and it'll be so much, it won't interfere with the flow of the airport, and it won't freak the people out, and we'll be able to really tell who's going to do what. So we did. We made up a model, and we did our little experiments, and then we went to the people who were, we were going to be the subcontractors. So we went to them, and they said, "Oh, well, that's a great idea. Here, we have 3 or 4 airports that we're allowed to test our new technology in. This is, we can stick this stuff in there." And we put it in there, and it worked like a charm. Way better than the the big fat guy feeling people up. So, I helped write the proposal. I didn't go to the big meeting. And so, we basically, I went on to do something else. And then the next time I had a contract with these guys, I went back and saw the boss and said, "So what happened to that project?" And he goes, "Well, it's a very strange story." And I said, "Well, you can tell me." And he said, "Well, I got this amazing check for what we did, like 100 times more than what we had asked for. And then they said, just forget it. We'll take all the data. We'll take your algorithms. Thank you very much." And then we said, "So we're going to implement it and they said, "No." And that was that. And then, so he's in that business. He goes to these conferences and conventions, and he talks to some other people who had similar but not the same kind of technology, not looking at body language. I mean, they were looking at facial recognition, so they'd make these lists of people. Anyway, so what happened, well, and this is like 2002, with inside of some cabal, they decided to not use it at airports, because what they really wanted to do is, inflict fear and panic to the traveling public. But what they wanted to do is take this technology and put it out ubiquitous across the country so that they would get, and this is when, you know, social media was coming online, and they said, we're going to marry this so people who are staring at their phone, we're going to get all of their everything right then and there, and we're going to have these gigantic warehouses of that data. And, that's where the NSA plugged all this stuff in. So there's all this going on in our civilization, right now. Hey there, guys. But what has occurred about 30 years ago, and I saw a part of this myself when I was at Duke in 1968, and this corporation that was out of California, out of, it was called the SEAL Corporation, just like the SEAL teams, SEAL Corporation. And it was housed right next to, Lockheed. They didn't say they were part of Lockheed. And they were at Duke, and they were studying parapsychology. And what they wanted to do is make a super soldier, right? And so they were studying esoteria. They were studying the occult. They were studying, Indian philosophy, Sufism, Hinduism, all the above. And taking all, Wilhelm Reich's work, Tesla's work, all the above. And so at that time, I was, this is when, Al Bob was having, he was on tour. Al Bob on tour. And what I was doing was, the war was really heating up. I was going to be graduating high school. And I was, and I had been initially involved with the anti-war movement through my involvement with the social movement, of the poor and the downtrodden, and that, and not just the black folk, but everybody, So I was and I was doing that, A, because that's me, and B, I wanted to build. C, you shouldn't hire me. I can't be in your army. Look at all this stuff. I'm not your kind of guy. I didn't want to pretend I was Klinger, but I was going at it my own way. So I was doing all these social things and involved in all kinds of stuff. And then when I got my draft warrant, I had a lot of friends who were like, really anti-war guys. But I was never that, because I realized that was like useless, right? It was just, wringing out your angst. For that poor soldier boy who came back, you shouldn't be yelling at him, or the lieutenant or the colonel or any of those guys or any, it's, it's sorry, that's not their fault, really. I mean, yes, they're the instrument of this whole thing, but they're worse off than, and you who are screaming and going marching and burning your dress, you are a bourgeois prig, and so it just didn't sit right with me. My dad being a military guy, I had a lot of friends and family in the military, so I wasn't going to go there. I just didn't, there had to be, again, I'm constantly thinking about this alternative aesthetic. There's a different way to do this. So my way of doing it, just my way, I wasn't going to tell anyone to do it, just leading by example, is that I never burned my draft card. I never broke the law. It's just when that thing, hey, come on, we want to talk to you about this, I wasn't there. And then when they, he hasn't, responded, didn't show up at the time and date, no, that's not against the law, because I wasn't legally responsible because I legally didn't receive that piece of mail. So they would go looking for me, and my roommate or my neighbor or whatever, my boss would say, well, he was just here. I don't know where he is now, just here. And so when things got, I had to widen my abilities to not be there, I went to other places. And where do you go to hide but in plain sight? So I went to colleges and hung out in colleges. And I went to the really interesting colleges. I didn't have the money or the, connects to get in, or wanted to lick enough butthole to get in. And so, I went to places like Georgetown and Duke University and MIT and Brown and, Chapel Hill and a whole bunch of other, Cornell. And then 15 years later, I did it again, but this time I was actually getting paid to go to those places. But these, in the early 60s and 70, I graduated in 69, high school. But in those 3 years, I was basically, on tour because my prep school, we had a lot of, we were there 24/7, and so we had less days we had to go to school because we were going there more. We never left. We were there, always there, there. It was like a jail. And my fellow students were the richest people on earth. Ricky Lynch and Eddie Merrill, Marilyn Lynch. Perry Dye owned Singer, every largest, top 20 on the blue chips. These families owned, and they didn't even have stockholders. These families owned. These people were as close to being the owner, crew as anybody was. So these are kids I went to school with, So I had a totally different view, a world view. My grandma, to all these people in New York City, and the intellectuals, the highbrows, the lowbrows, every brow, to the richest people. Joe Kennedy was my roommate. He was just such a, a sock, a bag full of rocks were smarter than this kid. He used to ask me, "Why do you read so much?" I'm a Kennedy. I don't have to read. I said, "Oh, good for that." Well, I'm not. Anyway, so I was on the road, and one of the places and what I would do, I had a herringbone jacket, and I had a pipe, and I had corduroy shoes and Weegens, right? And so I would show up, and I'd have a nice little, goatee, very well trimmed, and my hair well trimmed, and I would just go in, hang out at the library, go to the coffee shop, the Rathskeller, the bookstore, and find the most interesting, attractive, really smart students there. And we'd start talking about books, walking around, and and she goes, "Are you a teacher here?" "Oh, no, no." "You a student here?" "No, no, I'm just a scholar." "What do you mean you're a scholar?" I said, "Well, I come to these institutes and I just read the books and I find interesting people." She goes, "Do you have a girlfriend?" "No." "Well, you know, I have a very nice room and I don't have a roommate. You know, why don't you come over and see it?" "Sure, let's go." Go over there. Things just happen. I become that and her boyfriend and even more. Her muse. I mean, that's one of the things, all these guys say they need a muse. Well, smart women need a muse too, right? And I learned that early because all of my girlfriends, when I was a teenage boy in New York City, I didn't have, you know, Susie Q from high school because I went to an all boys school, but I had all these women, between the ages of 22 and 40 who I was their pool boy without the pool. So I learned what women were about, what they liked, again, and said, you know, who are they? Where they come from? What are they doing? And I would be their muse for all of that. So this young girl at Duke, brilliant, just, and she was studying, brain chemistry before it was even, that was her thing. She wanted to know why people did stuff they were. And her father was an endocrinologist, and his whole thing was the vagus nerve. And she knew that hormones made people do stuff. And then she also knew, because her mother was Buddhist, so she, as a little girl, learned how to meditate. And, she was the first person to kind of get me to meditate. I mean, I had done it a few times, was exposed to it, kind of knew about it, knew, that was about breathing, but with her. So, and you guys can thank what I do to you, to this young lady. Anyway, so I had already been, part of the Theosophical Society and all these, through Madame Olga Kluber. I had been around that occult and esoteric scene. I was part of the Wiser Book Club and all these other kind of, unknown, the ISIS, all these foundations and institutes, which were just as they say, a cutout for somebody else, right? So I had all this experience, right? I was still just a little peanut guy. I had, through those guys, I learned about Wilhelm Reich's work, and I was making orgone boxes. I learned about Tesla's, and I was making devices that he was doing. And then I read what Edison had done and Morey had done, and that's when I got into sensory deprivation tanks. And that's when I met this guy. He wrote a book called The Dieter Factor, and he was an extraterrestrial. He was a northern, he was about, six something, had these flowing blonde hair. And he had a really great apartment, rent-controlled apartment, right off of, Central Park West, and in a really, that building that the first Ghostbusters was in, and the second one where the guy had that painting, and Vlad the Impaler came out of the painting, and there was that building, and up on the right. Well, that guy, what was his name? But he wrote a book called The Dieter Factor, right? And so we met at one of these, salons, and I know all this Tesla stuff, through Grandpa Stoll. And he says, wow, this is really, interesting. I want to take you, show my, and I said, well, the girls loved him, so I knew this guy wasn't gay, but, that would have been fine. He just didn't float my boat. But he was a very interesting guy. And he was another of these people who was more than 8 feet tall, and no one seemed to notice. I was the only guy who said, boy, this guy's a pretty tall guy. And he wore clothes that were weirder than mine. And yet everyone looked at him as like he was like, a lot of people said, oh, yeah, he's an earl. Oh, he's a prince. He's a Russian this. Oh, he's from here. And he wasn't any of those things, but that's what they thought they were. And that's what they saw in him. It was like, and I was going, boy, this guy's got some pretty interesting stuff going on here. And he's the only guy that when I said, who I'm going to take this guy to, I'm going to take him to Madame Olga Gruber. And he was the only guy who thought that she wouldn't let him in, but he didn't get past the storeroom. he didn't go through the mirror, And he was very respectful. I mean, really more respectful than he knew what she was. She knew what he was, right? And when I asked him, so what is that guy? And she said, well, at this moment, he's your teacher. I said, no, come on. You got to, where did he come from? What is he? Where? I know he is all these different things to different people, and no one sees him. She goes, that's why he's your teacher. You're the only guy who really can see him for what he is. So he's safe, I'm sure he's safe. He's going to teach you some really important stuff. You don't have that need to know exactly who he is, where he came from, or even what he's doing here. And I said, okay, not a problem. If you say that he's okay and I should be, being with him, hanging with him, I like him. He's loads of fun. He's like really, when we go out, he's like my, Marlboro Man friend. He's like a chick magnet, and I'm a swing guy. And he's like, he's got whitish blonde hair. He doesn't have any wrinkles, but he gives off this aura of being older than time, like a Time Lord. He's like, Doctor Who. Before I ever saw Doctor Who, here's the first Doctor Who. And I can't believe I can't remember his name. I mean, I can remember the book he wrote, The Dieter Factor. Anyway, so we, you know, he takes, he's got this amazing apartment, and in that he has his own little laboratory, kind of, but not a real laboratory, not like my laboratory down on Hudson Street. Not like Mohawk Electric, which was one of Tesla's laboratories. And he was like Trump. He put his name on everything, except after they started burning down his buildings and he's losing all his books. There's one laboratory that someone else built for him and kept it in their name. It was called Mohawk Electric. And it made the stators for the generators that were up on Niagara Falls. Right, Westinghouse didn't make those. This place did. Anyway, long story short, that was my loft, my laboratory, and it was a great space. And I took him there, and that's where he said, I want you to fabricate this, because I had been fabricating things for the big elevator of cars up there in Washington Square for Mike Finelli, and lots of little devices I fabricated for people, especially power supplies. That was my art form. And so this guy wanted to make sensory deprivation tanks, but because it was like the rage, it was going along with the LSD rage of the 60s. And but, so I said, okay, I actually think I know a place we can kind of get some tanks because Mike Finelli, he did karting, right? And so he had these things that were dumpsters, and they were all different sizes, like ones were like a 1 yard that you kind of rolled around, 1 yard, 2 yard, 5 yard, 10 yard. And there were these 5 yard containers, that were, I don't know, 8 feet long, 4 foot wide, maybe 5 foot deep, right? So, and they, Sangumba had a place over in Brooklyn that fabricated these things, they had one of these punches that just took a sheet of metal and just made 80% of it, and then they welded stuff onto it. Anyway, so we showed them what we wanted, the 5 yard container, and then we wanted another, a door, which they had, so you could throw stuff into them, and we wanted a door, but we wanted a roof, not welded on top of it, but about a foot above, because we kind of needed it to be around 5 foot deep, so it could have about 3 feet of water, and that you could step into it comfortably, and then walk to the middle or end of it, depending on how tall you were, and then sit down in it, and then lie down, and the water was so salty you would float on top of it, right? So the water had to be circulated, and it had to be heated, and it had to be kept at a certain salinity, and he wanted it, and that was your average a sensory deprivation tank, a vessel that you close the door, it'd be darker than dark, and that you would sit on, lie on top of the salt water, and it would be warm, right? And there would be no movement of air per se, right? But it would be ventilated. But he wanted to go even further. There is this whole technology called anaconda shapes, or geometric shapes that are to the frequency of sound, right? And in these, they have these rooms that they test radar and aircraft, and certain frequencies are absorbed, and it's like kind of this black spongy material, and you cut up at different shapes, and it absorbs those frequencies, right? And the other thing this guy wanted was that, and have a real sensitive, water purification and temperature, real sophisticated, real at a certain rate. And same with the air. And he wanted glued on the top ceiling these, and that's why we needed a little taller than just the tank. So when you walked into it, you wouldn't, whack your head on these things. And the other thing he wanted was a Faraday cage around it. So your body would have no sense of gravity, no sense of temperature, no sense of smell, sound, sight, or electromagnetics, right? And when you went into this thing and lied down on it, you went to places way, 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 way more than any acid trip or any kind of meditation, astral. I mean, this was like, right? So, when I'm at Duke and I'm hanging with this girl, and she is, studying parapsychology. No one knows what that and brain chemistry, and also the electromagnetics. And when I told her I knew how to make Faraday cages, she said, "Oh wow, can you make electrons?" And I said, "Yeah, I think give me a bench, give me this." And she goes, "I want you to introduce you to my boss." I said, "Your boss?" She goes, "Well, I'm not, I'm a grad student here." I said, "You're a grad student? You're fucking 19." She goes, "Well, I graduated, Brown, and then I went to MIT, and now, I finished, that when I was 19, 18, 17, and now I'm here going for my PhD." I said, "Yeah, I knew you were smart." So she takes me to her boss, and he owns this corporation called Seal Corporation, and they are being, they've been hired by DARPA to study, parapsychology and everything about human everything, what makes them tick. So it can be manipulated to make super soldiers, because they had all these movies of these guys in Kathmandu putting swords through their cheeks, from earth cheek to that cheek, putting it right through, and then pulling it out, and 15 minutes, it's all healed. You can't even see a scar. They wanted soldiers who could get shot and keep going, and then, the bullet he'd spit it out, and they'd be okay. And they were studying every friggin' aspect of that, and also dimensional reality, right? And so when she told her boss about me, he said, "Oh, I got to meet this guy." And so he pulled me in, right? He says, I got a pretty big budget, and I can pretty much spend it on anything without really having to give you a W-2. Nobody gets a W-2 here, This is like kind of off the books. So he goes, "I'd like to hire you as a consultant, and I'd like you to build those tanks for me. I'd need about 8 of them. And you can charge me whatever you want per tank." I said, "Whatever? Okay. How about 15 grand? And all the materials and a shop to make them in." He said, "Done." Okay. So I knocked out 10 of them. That's 150 grand cash, right? So when I finished the job, he gives me not quite that. A lot, not quite that, but way more than I had, that's for sure. And he had given me a lot on, little envelopes on the way to finishing all of this. It took me about 3 months. And in those 3 months, this girl and I just had the best of times. And I had a great time with all the people who worked on this program. And and they weren't just doing the thing that I was doing. They were doing everything. And they were doing a lot of LSD, every kind of chemistry you could ever imagine they were doing, right? And they were getting into, you name it, they were getting into religions, into mythology, into, everything you could think of. The Thule Society, because I was part of all these organizations in New York. That was another reason this guy liked, and he said, "So who do you know who might like to want to play around, with us?" And I gave him a little list, and they came down, and it was an amazing salon of intellect. And this is how the atomic bomb was made. They put them in an environment where they could be co-creative, right? So everybody was doing it for different reasons. So they could, have access to things that they didn't have access to. I was doing it for that reason. They were getting paid more than they normally would get getting paid. Well, I was doing it for that reason. Now, my other two reasons is because I really liked this girl, and this made our everything together just so much better. I mean, I was being her muse. I was like pushing her through the stratosphere. She was brilliant. She had really great experiences, as a youngster, as a teenager. She graduated, with her master's degree before she was 19. This girl was going someplace, but she needed that little sensei elbow, pebble in the pond to nudge her into places I was her muse, and when I'm with the right woman, I'm their muse, I'm still that way, you know, but most women I find today are scared. They don't want to be what they could be, Now there are a few out there that I still spark up with and are all for that, but it's to study psychology and to be a surgeon and do brain surgery, blah, blah, blah. And, there's a lot of stuff I talked to her about, and she was like, wow, it's amazing. You know that? Oh, yeah, oh, wow. You knew that person? Yeah. Wait. And she was like enamored by those stories. But when I said, you could do this and you could do this and you could go there and, I could just make one phone call and you could be in Rome at the Polytechnic, and she was like, she almost hyperventilated, right? And, all we were doing was having lunch, I wasn't really pushing any buttons. I was just saying, hey, you could do whatever you want, kid. You are really a smart cookie, one smart cookie. Really a smart cookie, one smart cookie. And if you want, just get me, let's go someplace warm. Just take me someplace warm. Really got to get out of here. I mean, we're about to have a snow blizzard I'm doing everything I can. I talked to one guy, oh, we're going to have 18 inches. I was like, really? I'm going to be stuck here with, and then I'm just trying to make it, let it be. Because then it'll be gone in a little while. We'll be able to drive on it. It won't be that bad. But anything over 4 inches, please. So anyway, this was a while back. And she was the most promising, really. And she was, not youngster. She wasn't like the girl at Duke, that's for sure. And that girl at Duke was, not just hot to trot. She realized I was her muse, right? And we were about to, let's see, who was older? We were about almost the same age, but she had matriculated, through a number of institutions. I was just Sensei El Bob, not quite, I was just a cheeky monkey, I was a Padawan. And so she had all these degrees and a good deal of experience, but she had nothing like I had. And she knew that, and she loved the fact. And when we co-created, when she and I were together and loves co-creation, man, the stuff we did, and her boss, or my boss too, was like amazed at what we could do together. And that's what it's about, right? So, and there were Nazis there. There's everybody there. This was a DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Program organization, whatever DARPA stands for. Nexus, lots of things were, once they saw this thing spinning up, and it wasn't just me, there were a lot of other people like me, other adepts, other, making things happen, other masters, everybody was there between, I guess, 68 to 72 was at the highlight of that. And then it hit it went luminescent. And then they took the different component parts and took them other places and then brought them dark. And that's kind of what happens when you have these luminescent breakthroughs, eureka's, they take things apart. And that scene from Indiana Jones, the Ark one, the first one, where, the government boys come, what is this thing, the Ark? And then him goes off and gets it, takes it away from the Nazis and brings it back. and they're in that office in D.C., and they hand the check to his buddy, and the guy's eyes pop out, and the government boys, is that enough money? And go, oh yeah, that's enough money. And then Indy goes, but you said we could do research on this, and then the government boys say, well, Dr. Joyens, we have, more superior intellects, the head people. And they go, what do you mean? You came to us. You didn't even know what it was. I had to show you what it was. I had to teach you. There is, I know everybody. There is nobody better than us. And they said, here's the check for you, Mr. Jones. Now, there's the door. And, he was pissed off. Well, that's kind of what happened to us. But I wasn't pissed off. I couldn't care less, because it was a bad time for me because I'm surrounded by government people. And I'm starting to get a little itchy because they're starting to, who's that guy? And the head guy goes, oh, that's Al, And the security people who are obviously security, and this is when, it went from being this Hawaiian fun thing for guys, all these intellect guys and gals, to the military now. DARPA is this thing between the kids who know how to make things work and the guys who want to kill people. That's what DARPA is. It's that thing in between. And so when the security people and started to come in and like start taking things away and started questioning, so who's that guy? That's when I said, oh, I guess I gotta go. And the sweetness between me and the girl was still sweet, but she had kind of chosen. They had basically said, okay, honey, we're taking you out of here and we're going to take you to a place that'll blow your mind. You'll be able to, we'll put you in charge. Like your boss is in charge, we're going to put you in charge, And she's like only 20 then, right? And she really, what do you call it when you want to move up the ladder in your career? She really, anyway, we had a nice little vacation. We kind of hit the road, and we went in her nice little, they gave her a nice little car. I'm sure it had a tracker on it. And we went down to Kitty Hawk, and nobody was in Kitty Hawk in those days. And we found a nice motel and spent a nice week there. It was spring. And, then I moved on to my next place to hide and with my herringbone jacket. And then I came back to New York, and that's when, Marion Tulin, I graduated high school, and Marion Tulin got me into Hofstra University and then Juilliard. And then she sent me off to Trinity. So that was what that was about. Anyway, but why I told that story was there were a group of Indian scientists, very English. I mean, they were English more than Indian, but they were from India. But they were from Oxford. They were from, the place in Scotland, Edinburgh. They had been studying all of the Druidic stuff. They had it down. But they weren't bards. They weren't Druids. They were, scholastics and scholars. There were some scholars there. And, no one talked of Trinity. And, but it was all the English Druidic stuff, not the Irish Druidic stuff. And the Indian guys were all about the Sufis and, from all about the dudes from the Himalayas. And they had a bunch of those guys there, too. They could, like, stick, swords and you name it through their bodies, not a problem. And so we were studying them. I mean, I wasn't, but my girlfriend was. She was, studying them, every which way. And there were folks within the construct, from Switzerland. They were there, and they were definitely Nazis. And they had unearthed a substance in the Himalayas and in Tibet and in Brazil. It was an oil, right? And this oil, and these guys also did experiments with all different kinds of materials, that you get out of the earth. And as best they could, they would crystallize them. And then they would, again, put them on speakers and then have an audio generator and make certain frequencies until the sand or the crystal or whatever would vibrate. And then as they click, 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 click through the different frequencies, once in a while, that frequency would turn that sand into a Sitchin, into a mathematical pattern, right? And then they took that mathematical pattern, looked at the chemical properties of those substances, and then started to, use alchemy on them to turn them into something that never existed. And very similar to what chimeras are in genetic engineering. Like, anyway, so, and they were also into genetic, they knew the Nazis had broken the DNA code, had been doing gene splicing, had been doing, making clones, making chimeras, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And those guys were there. But they weren't doing that. That was 1930s, 40s, 50s, right? And, but I would hang, I had this sweet, good-looking, brilliant girlfriend who was, pretty higher up in that whole cadre of people doing this stuff, because what she was doing, nobody was doing. She was mixing medicine and psychotherapy and, energetics together. And she, like I said, she taught me how to meditate. Her mother's whole Buddhist thing, she really was quite extraordinary person. I'd like to know where she is today. She's about my age, right? We were almost the same age. I think I might have been a few months older, or she was, I'm not quite sure. But we were almost the same age. So it was a very interesting crew. So these Nazi guys who were doing this alchemical thing with, minerals, created the first thing I saw of the black oil. And the black oil was intelligent, right? It had a soul base. And that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to extract or create an artificial soul, because they thought if they could put an artificial soul into their super soldier, it would be invincible. It would have the soul energy. And through the Hindu things that they had studied in the 30s and 40s, they realized that the soul energy was the most powerful thing. And they also knew about the visitors, because they had been involved with those guys. And so was DARPA, and so was magic. And there were magic people there, and Majestic 12, were there. And this was a magic program, and it wasn't just a DARPA program. DARPA is like the cutout for magic. No one talks about magic. And magic had been around way before Roswell. There was a lot of this stuff that folk knew about way before, back, if you ever watched that TV show on Fox, I think, or maybe CBS, Sleepy Hollow. That was a very good program, because that really gave the heads up of what, who are we? Where do we come from? What are we doing here? You have to realize we are an artificially manufactured bag of water. We're our avatar, right? Our whole existence is an illusion. We're kept in this kind of energetic state that we can be used. Just like the movie The Matrix, but even weirder, right? And so they manufactured this this black ooze, And so, why am I telling you all this story? Because someone sent me a a video today, and where you will find it is if you're in YouTube and you put the little spyglass on AMMACK, it will go to this, and they talk about this, right? AMMACH, right? And I think the guy who, if you go to Michael or Mike Jackson on YouTube, it'll go to a place on his like things that he wants you to look at are some of this. And this AMMACH channel, that's kind of what they're at. They're at into, this crude oil that has, it's they call it a sentient fluid. And it's kind of, made up name is black goo, right? And that's kind of where Chris Carter of the X-Files got the black goo. So this stuff came out of Duke University's, SEAL Corporation experiments, right? And all these things were taken black. And they went all, they didn't all go together. They all went all over the place in different projects, right? And I forget what they're called. They're like off budget. Why do we have drugs? Because they need to pay for this, right? Why does we have this? The Cold War ended in the 90s. We didn't. Everybody stopped spending. I mean, Russia couldn't spend on weapons anymore. Russia spends, like a 20th of what we spend on weapons. Actually, the United States spends more money on weapons and the Defense Department than the rest of the world combined, right? And we had all these agreements, even during the Cold War, the U.S. and Russia had these agreements that we just were like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you're my enemy, right? Because what better enemy to have than your buddy? Same with China. Same with all. We don't have any nation states. We're all. It's like it's a small world after all. It's a small world. Anyway, so they made this crude oil, and it was sentient. It had a soul. Soul oil. It's a soul oil. And so, but they couldn't do anything nasty with it, right? And when they, injected it into their subjects, all it did was make them nice people who didn't want to be angry, who wouldn't get mad, who wouldn't, try to tear your head off. What's the sense of having a super soldier if all he wants to do is make cookies and knit and paint paintings and write poetry, right? So they said, oh, this is a waste of time. And these morons, but again, this is the positive, unexpected consequence, basically just went out to the back of where their lab was and dumped it in the ground and then dumped it in the toilet. So this stuff went into the ground, into the water table, went into the sewer, went out, into the river, and then went out into the ocean. And in the last 30 years, it has been accumulating itself all over the friggin' planet. And it has been making new species of animals. And it has been affecting human beings who come, say you live next to where the sewer line, shoots out and goes into the river, and your little apartment house is like right next to it in the ghetto. It is affecting people, and people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Jack Kennedy and a number of other folk, because of just the roll of the dice, got exposed to this stuff and they became somebody else, right? So this is kind of what happened, you know? And the black goo had been around longer than when I bumped into it in 1968, right? I think it had been around, the Nazis were playing with it, right? And so, and they were trying to perfect it, meaning they made it just like LSD. They made it and it did this and it didn't do kind of what they wanted it to do. So they kept fooling around with it. You know, hopefully we'll figure out how to make a really pissed off person with this shit, and then we can go to town with it. Well, you know, they didn't. You know, and so, you know, the first batch they made in 1936 got thrown out. The next batch in 1941 got thrown out. The next batch that got thrown out was, you know, then in the 50s and the 60s, you know, so were many batches that relatively manifested themselves in different ways, right? So that guy, you know, Mike Jackson's or Jackson's or Johnson, Mike Johnson's channel has a number of people on his thing that just, you know, it isn't all, you know, the AMMACH channel. That's pretty much about things like the black goo. But the other guys, there was this other guy who, you know how I'm talking about, you know, love's co-creation is the only thing that is, right? And, you know, I'm talking about how the devil came down the lightning bolts of the SS and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm telling you little bits of the story, right? Well, this guy, you know, and I'm not really giving you technical jargon. And I'm just kind of on the griot. I'm telling you a story that I'm putting down shamanically that vibratorily goes inside of you because I want you to figure this out. You come to me, you go to your Akashic record. That's why I showed you how to go to the Akashic record. So you could go there and, you know, get the 411, the real 411, the you know, the nuts and the bolts, the blueprint, the whole storyline, right? Well, this guy on Mike Johnson's channel, he is coming from, I mean, he is downloading it from Venus, and he is really talking about the nuts and the bolts, about the frequencies, the harmonics, all the politics, all the different groups, all the different factions, all the different everything. And he's, you know, as I only, you know, I'm like totally, you know, the only thing that's real is love's co-creation. Well, he kind of tips his hat to that, but he is so into the nuts and bolts of the illusion, which is a good thing. You know, it's good to understand how they have, you know, built the set, you know, how they had the movie, you know, the Hollywood going, you know. I mean, that's good, you know. And so it would be worthwhile. And if you go find these two guys, those two YouTube channels will take you to a myriad, because I just kind of was flipping through a lot of stuff. And if I can ever figure out how to, you know, have you see my playlist, I have to figure out how to make this public. I keep liking all these things. I don't watch them all the way through because, oh, that's about, oh, yeah, I know what that's about. Like, right? Which is also, you know, giving the 411 out, here I am. So, you know, Sophia can, you know, I keep saying my business plan is to find some, again, amazing woman to come pick me up in her limousine and take me to, you know, a nice warm place where we can have that as the deep green for everyone to come, right? And she has way more money than any of us and can be the seed cash of doing this and having the right connections to interests, the National Endowment of the Arts and National Endowment of Science and all of the sock puppets of the powers that shouldn't be and the hidden hand. Because we have to not confront these guys, we have to bring to them this alternative aesthetic. Because, like, remember how I started this off in October? 40 days and 40 nights, the window is open. We can, right? Well, the window's still open. We're not at the last day of 40 days and 40 nights because it's not linear. As long as we don't give up, as long as we keep plugging, as long as we move forward, we're going to win. And winning doesn't mean somebody else is losing. In what we do, winning means everybody wins, And, it would behoove, the insectoids, to freaking get a life and have some fun. Stop tormenting the poor little monkeys, Stop stealing what they don't need to steal. It's like people who keep buying stuff from Amazon. I mean, it's sad that the folk who just, binge out on Amazon don't realize that their mind is being controlled and they're not buying the shit from Amazon because they want it. It's because Amazon has gotten in their head and, saying, yo, you need this. Oh, you need that. Oh, you need this. You don't. Anyway, so where are you guys? Where is the chatters? What happened to everybody? Anybody? There's 9 of you there. 4 of you even like it. Where did the chat, and why is there no chat going on? Did I somehow knock myself off? Are you sure you want to stop? Cancel. Come on, somebody say something. Otherwise, I'm gonna leave and come back. Come on, anybody chatting? Did I do something wrong to not chat right? So I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay, it's been an hour and 22 minutes and 37 seconds, right? So I'm going to say goodnight, Gracie, right now, and come back in a few minutes, right? Okay.